The faint drizzle of the early morning still left traces on the sidewalks as Tony pushed open the glass doors of City General Hospital. It was 5:40 a.m., and the main corridor exhaled that characteristic scent of disinfectant mixed with reheated coffee he'd known for decades. His footsteps echoed softly against the waxed floor, each tread measured and respectful, as if walking on hallowed ground. At 62, he carried on his stooped shoulders the weight of a lifetime dedicated to public service, first as a nurse, then as a janitor when a back injury forced him to change roles. His navy blue uniform, washed so many times it had lost its original color, hung loosely on his thin frame. His hands, marked by small scars from decades of handling equipment and chemicals, carefully held the cleaning cart. There was no rush in his movements, only a silent precision that spoke of years of experience and quiet pride in a job well done. Tony wasn't a man of many words, but each corridor he cleaned, each room he organized, received his complete attention, as if it were a temple under his care. That morning, as he headed towards the emergency room, he crossed paths with the head nurse, Dr. Helen, a middle-aged woman who always greeted him with a respectful nod. She seemed particularly tense, checking papers on her clipboard with an unusual urgency. Tony noticed but didn't ask. He'd learned over the years that the hospital had its own rhythms and crises, and that his role was to keep everything running behind the scenes, invisible but essential. He started, as always, with the emergency room restrooms. It was a job many avoided, but he performed it with the same dedication he would give to any other task. As he scrubbed the floor with circular and precise movements, he heard raised voices coming from the main corridor. An argument between doctors, something about protocols and responsibilities. Tony slightly lowered the volume of the portable radio that always accompanied him, an old companion that played classical music at low volume, and continued working. It was when he emerged from the restroom that he witnessed the scene that would change his morning. A man in a dark suit, appearing to be in his 50s, was gesticulating nervously in front of the reception desk. His voice, though controlled, carried a barely concealed irritation. "You don't understand," he said. "I'm Councilman Miller. My wife can't wait in this line like everyone else. She needs priority treatment." Behind the counter, the receptionist, a young woman no older than 25, patiently explained that treatment followed a first-come, first-served basis and clinical severity. Her eyes, however, betrayed the discomfort of the situation. In line, about 15 people waited, a mother with a baby in her arms, an elderly man leaning on a cane, a young man with a bandaged arm, an elderly woman discreetly coughing into a tissue. "You don't know who you're talking to," the councilman continued, his voice taking on a more menacing tone. "I can get you fired. My wife has a terrible migraine, and she's not going to sit here like these people." The disdain in the last word echoed down the corridor, causing some patients to lower their eyes, others to frown. Tony stopped. He had witnessed similar scenes before, but something that morning, perhaps the rain, perhaps the accumulated fatigue of years of observing small injustices, made this situation hurt differently. He observed the politician's wife, who remained seated a few chairs behind, clearly embarrassed by her husband's behavior. She didn't seem to be in extreme distress, just uncomfortable with the whole situation. The receptionist, with patience that deserved a medal, repeated the hospital's rules. "Sir, I understand your concern, but everyone here has their own emergencies. Triage is done by medical severity, not social standing." Her voice trembled slightly in the last sentence, but remained firm. "Social standing?" the councilman scoffed. "I pay your salaries with my taxes. You all work for me, whether you like it or not." He pointed to the people in line. These people probably don't even contribute to the system. I'm entitled to preferential treatment. It was then that Tony noticed something the councilman hadn't. Dr. James, one of the most respected doctors in the hospital, stood at the entrance to the triage room, observing the entire scene. He wasn't a physically imposing man, short, back-spectacled, with unruly graying hair, but his presence had a moral authority that transcended any political office. Tony had known him for 15 years, knew that he had refused offers from private hospitals to continue serving in the public system, that he arrived before hours and left after, that he treated each patient with the same dedication, whether a homeless person or a businessman. The doctor slowly walked to the counter, his sandals making a soft noise against the floor. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but firm. The councilman turned, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Finally, someone with authority. Doctor, I'm Councilman Miller, and I need my wife to be seen immediately. She has a severe migraine." Dr. James nodded respectfully. "I understand your concern, Councilman. Allow me to check on your wife." He walked to where she was sitting, knelt beside her chair, a gesture that silenced the entire corridor, and spoke to her in a low voice for a few minutes. He checked her blood pressure, examined her eyes with a small flashlight, and asked about her symptoms. During this time, Tony observed the reactions of the people around him. The mother with the baby watched with interest, the elderly man with the cane smiled discreetly. The young receptionist seemed relieved to have someone taking charge. The councilman, in turn, paced impatiently back and forth, clearly annoyed. When Dr. James returned to the counter, his expression was serene. "Councilman Miller, your wife does indeed have a migraine, but she's not showing any signs of severity that warrants emergency treatment. I can prescribe some pain relief and give her instructions for recovery at home. That will be more effective than waiting here." "This is unacceptable," the councilman exploded. "I didn't come here to be dismissed. I want her seen by a specialist now." Dr. James remained calm. "Sir, as a doctor, my responsibility is to provide the best possible care to all patients. Your wife doesn't need a specialist right now. She needs rest and proper medication." He paused, looking directly into the councilman's eyes. "Furthermore, I'd like to remind you that there are people here who have been waiting longer with conditions requiring more urgent medical attention." "Do you know who I am?" The councilman's voice rose. "I can make you—" "I know exactly who you are." James interrupted, his voice maintaining the same respectful but firm tone. "And I also know who these people are." He turned to the waiting room, gesturing to include all the patients. "This lady," he pointed to the elderly woman coughing, "is Mrs. Rose. She worked 40 years as a janitor in 3 public schools, raised 6 children alone, and is here today because she hasn't been able to stop coughing for 2 weeks, but only came because her daughter insisted." The waiting room fell silent. Dr. James continued, "This gentleman," he indicated the elderly man with the cane, "is Mr. John. He's a war veteran, lost his left leg serving his country, and is here because he fell at home last night but didn't want to bother anyone until this morning." His voice held a reverence that moved some people to tears. "This young mother," he went on, "is Carla. She works 2 shifts to support her son, and she's here because he's had a fever for 2 days, and she couldn't take time off work sooner. She came straight here from her night shift." The councilman tried to interrupt, but Dr. James gently raised his hand. "Councilman Miller, each person here has a story, a dignity, a real need. None of them asked to be prioritized because of who they are or what they've done. They simply wait, patiently and respectfully, for the care they deserve as human beings." Tony, who had remained motionless throughout the scene, felt something stir within him. He had witnessed similar injustices countless times, but had never seen anyone confront them with such dignity and wisdom. He realized he had tears in his eyes and discreetly wiped them away with the back of his hand. The daughter smiled weakly. "Dad, you're here now. That's what matters." Tony discreetly observed as he continued organizing the medication cart. The councilman seemed genuinely transformed, speaking with affection not only to his daughter, but also greeting the nurses and other patients respectfully. As he was leaving, the councilman stopped upon seeing Tony. For a moment, they looked at each other, and Tony saw in the man's eyes not arrogance, but humility and gratitude. "Mr. Tony," the councilman said, approaching him, I would like to thank you." "Thank you for what, sir?" "For witnessing my shame that day. For being present when Dr. James taught me a lesson I needed to learn. My daughter has been ill for 6 months, and I spent all that time fighting the system, demanding privileges, when I should have been learning from people like you and Dr. James about what dignity and service truly mean." Tony reflected on all the people he'd encountered throughout his career: patients who arrived scared and left with hope, families who found solace in his quiet presence, colleagues inspired by his dedication. He realized he'd never been invisible. He'd just been looking for recognition in the wrong places. The transformation hadn't happened just to him. Dr. James remained the same dedicated physician, but he was now also recognized as a mentor to young professionals, teaching them that true medicine went beyond technical procedures. Mrs. Rose, the elderly woman with the cough, had become one of the hospital's most beloved patients, always bringing small gifts for the staff and offering motherly advice to younger employees. Mr. John, the veteran, had become a hospital volunteer, helping other elderly patients feel more comfortable during treatments. Carla, the young mother, had secured a flexible job allowing her to better care for her son, and always stopped to chat with Tony when she came to the hospital for routine checkups. Even the receptionist had transformed. Inspired by Dr. James's demeanor, she'd enrolled in a psychology course, wanting to better understand how to help people in vulnerable situations. The Humanized Support Assistance program had grown, and other hospitals in the region were implementing similar initiatives. Tony had become a sort of mentor to the new assistants, teaching them that true strength wasn't in positions of power, but in the ability to maintain dignity and compassion even in the most difficult circumstances. On a spring afternoon, exactly 1 year after that transformative morning, Tony was arranging flowers a patient had brought for the staff when Dr. James approached. "Tony," the doctor said. "Sure, doctor." They walked to the hospital's small inner garden, a space that had been revitalized as part of the improvements proposed by Councilman Miller. Patients and staff frequently gathered there for moments of rest and reflection. "I wanted to talk to you about something," said Dr. James. "Do you remember that day a year ago?" "How could I forget?" "I've been thinking about what really happened that day. It wasn't just about putting an arrogant politician in his place. It was about reminding all of us, myself included, why we do what we do. You, with your quiet presence and unwavering dignity, were a catalyst for this transformation." Tony shook his head. "Doctor, I didn't do anything special. I just was myself." "Exactly," Dr. James smiled. "You were authentic. And authenticity, in a world full of masks and pretenses, is revolutionary. You taught me that we don't need grand gestures to make a difference. We need consistency, integrity, a presence that honors the dignity of everyone around us." They remained silent for a few moments, watching patients and visitors passing through the garden. Each person carried their own story, their own struggles and victories, their own needs for recognition and compassion. "You know," Dr. James continued, "I've been getting invitations to speak at other hospitals about that morning. Not to tell a story of heroism, but to talk about something simpler and deeper: the importance of seeing the humanity in every person, regardless of their social standing or economic condition." "And what do you say in those talks?" "I tell them about you, about how a man who could have felt belittled or ignored chose day after day to maintain his dignity and treat each person with respect. About how your quiet presence created an environment where justice and compassion could flourish. Tony felt tears in his eyes. Doctor, You're a hero, Tony. Not the kind who wears a cape or makes headlines, but the kind who holds the world up with small acts of kindness and integrity. The kind that truly matters. When Tony arrived home that night, he found Maria preparing dinner. She greeted him with a smile that had become even warmer over the past year. "How was your day?" she asked. "Transformative," he replied. Once again. They dined, talking about the small miracles they'd witnessed. A patient who had recovered against all odds. A family who found solace in his quiet presence. A young doctor who had chosen to work in the public sector, inspired by the atmosphere of compassion he'd found at the hospital.
"You know," Maria said, "I always knew you were special. Not because you were perfect, but because you never let hardship extinguish your kindness. Even when no one seemed to notice, you kept doing good." Maybe that's it, Tony reflected. Maybe true strength lies in continuing to be good even when the world seems not to reward goodness, in maintaining dignity even when others question it, in believing that every person deserves respect even when that belief isn't reciprocated. Maria held his hand. And look where that's taken you. You not only maintained your integrity, but inspired others to find theirs. That night, before bed, Tony looked out his bedroom window. The city was quiet, but he knew that in every house, in every building, there were people facing their own battles, carrying their own wounds, seeking their own forms of dignity and purpose. He thought of all the Tonys in the world, people who work quietly, who maintain their integrity even when it's not easy, who treat others with respect even when they don't receive the same treatment, people who clean hallways, who care for the elderly, who teach children, who serve food, who drive buses, who collect garbage, all performing essential roles in the fabric of society, often without recognition, but always with dignity. He also thought of all the Dr. Jameses in the world, people in positions of authority who choose to use their power to uplift others, who recognize the humanity in each person, who transform moments of injustice into lessons of compassion. People who remind the world that true leadership isn't about demonstrating power, but about empowering others. And he thought of the Councilman Millers, people who, confronted with their own arrogance, choose humility and transformation instead of defensiveness and wounded pride. People who discover that true importance doesn't come from titles or positions, but from the ability to contribute positively to the lives of others. When he finally closed his eyes, Tony smiled. He had discovered something that few have the privilege of understanding. That a life well lived isn't measured by public recognition or material success, but by the consistency with which we treat others with dignity, by the integrity we maintain even when no one is watching, and by the ability to find purpose and meaning even in the simplest tasks. The following morning brought new challenges, new patients, new opportunities to make a difference. Tony put on his uniform, now with renewed pride, and headed to the hospital. As he walked down the familiar streets, he greeted neighbors, helped an elderly woman carry her groceries, and stopped to chat with a former colleague he met at the bus stop. Small gestures, but ones that carried the weight of a lifetime of conscious choices to be a positive force in the world. When he arrived at the hospital, he was greeted by genuine smiles from colleagues and patients who had learned to value his presence not just as an employee, but as a human being. And so life continued, enriched by the understanding that true heroism doesn't need stages or spotlights. It exists in the daily consistency of small acts of kindness, in the dignity maintained even in the face of adversity, and in the ability to see and honor the humanity in every person we meet along our path. Tony's story didn't end that day, but it multiplied. Each person he touched with his quiet and dignified presence carried with them a lesson about the value of authentic humanity. Dr. James continued to mentor, teaching young doctors that true medicine begins with recognizing the dignity in each patient. Councilman Miller, transformed by the experience, implemented policies that improved not only the conditions of the hospitals, but also the way society values those who serve behind the scenes. Mrs. Rose, Mr. John, Carla, and so many other patients who witnessed that transformative morning carried with them the certainty that their dignity matters, regardless of their social standing. They became, in turn, silent advocates for justice and compassion in their own communities. And Maria, the faithful wife who always knew her husband's worth, continued to be the quiet source of strength that sustained not only Tony, but all those he managed to touch through his loving influence. The true beauty of this story isn't in its ending, but in the understanding that each of us carries the power to transform injustices into moments of restored dignity. We don't need important positions or abundant resources. We only need the courage to maintain our integrity, the consistency of treating others with respect, and the wisdom to recognize that every person carries a valuable story. In a world that often values noise over substance, ostentation over authenticity, power over compassion, stories like Tony's remind us that the true heroes are those who choose day after day to be a positive presence in the world. They don't seek recognition, but leave a legacy of dignity. They don't give speeches about values, but live them quietly. They don't demand respect, but earn it through the consistency of their character. The morning that began with a silent injustice ended with the reaffirmation that human kindness, when recognized and honored, has the power to transform not only individuals, but entire communities. And that, sometimes, all we need is someone with enough moral authority to say, simply and firmly, every person here has dignity, and that dignity will be respected. The sun set over the city, casting a golden light on the hospital where so many lives had been touched and transformed. In the first-floor corridor, Tony's cleaning cart waited for another day of quiet service. But now it carried with it the certainty that all work done with love and integrity resonates far beyond its visible boundaries, creating waves of compassion that spread across generations. And so, the story continues, multiplied in every heart that chooses to see dignity where others see only function, that chooses to offer respect where others offer indifference, and that understands that true heroism isn't in grand gestures, but in the quiet consistency of a life well lived, a life that honors humanity in every encounter, in every moment, in every shared breath under the same sky that covers us all with equal generosity.